Hey guys, happy August 2023. It's Evan, and today's video topic is my pick for the best species of snake for an avid beginner keeper. And that would be the children's python, which I have right here. And I wanted to make kind of a unique video about suggestions of beginner species because I think we kind of get pigeonholed into a handful of different species, which there's nothing wrong with them. I think they're all great, and I've kept them. I keep most of them, like ball pythons, corn snakes, colubrids, all that type of stuff. But what I wanted to do right now is make a video for a very specific type of beginner keeper, and that's the type of keeper I describe as avid, and avid being eager or enthusiastic or having a long vision plan to that. And that's kind of and the reason I think that I'm drawn to making this type of videos is because that's the type of keeper I was when I started off, and it wasn't that I was like, oh, you know what I really want is a ball python, or oh, you know what I really want is a candy cane corn snake. It was, I want these species that I really don't have any business keeping right now, or I want a collection, or wouldn't it be cool to produce these? That was kind of my mindset from the start, was being really drawn to these really incredible dynamic animals that at the time I had no business keeping. There's still plenty of animals that I have no business keeping because of my experience and my means. But the point being is, when I wanted a snake, I wanted a snake that would move me towards those bigger goals, both in terms of skill and handling and care. And also, I wanted a snake that would kind of check some of those boxes that I was looking for in those those higher demanding species from the get-go. And so that was the type of beginner I was. I was an avid beginner. And if that's the type of beginner you are, then this is a great species for you. And I don't mean to place any value judgment on what type of keeper or what you're drawn to, because there are plenty of people that have a very limited view on how they want to keep snakes, and that's great. And how you relate to your animals is how you relate to them, and you can go deep and be a great keeper, an expert keeper, no matter what species you keep or numbers you keep. It's just for somebody who is really like drawn towards these more demanding animals, who didn't necessarily shy away from the idea that a snake might bite on occasion while I was learning to work with it. Those types of things are what I mean by an avid beginner. And these children's pythons, they're part of the Antaresia python complex, which are the Australian. There's four of them. There's the anthill, the tiniest. There's children's pythons, the second smallest. Then there's spotteds, and then there's Stimson's pythons. They're all very similar. I think in the U.S. at least you'll be hard pressed to find an anthill unless you want to really look for it. But any of those species are very similar, I believe. And I'd say that these snakes are really great for avid beginners because they punch above their weight class in three main categories that will really push you as a keeper. So the first thing I'll say is any beginner species needs to have three attributes to it. One, it needs to be relatively small, so it's safe for you as a keeper and it's a reasonable thing for you to keep, so you just don't have something that takes too much resources. Two, it needs to be a hardy animal, because one of the things that I don't think is acceptable is beginners getting species where their inexperience is going to cause an animal to suffer. So these are hardy animals. They do well in a wide range of environments, and they're also forgiving of mistakes. So I'd say that, not to say you can't care for them, but you're not going to harm this animal in your learning process. And the third thing is it needs to be reasonable and accessible for a beginner. So these animals can be had for less than $200 as babies. And I think that makes them kind of the sweet spot for a beginner animal, just in terms of what they are as a species. But these also punch above the belt, above their weight class, in three categories that a lot of beginner species don't. And the first one would be feeding. And by that I mean, as babies, and I'm going to show you babies here, they can be a little tricky to get started feeding on rodents. And that's really the responsibility of the breeder before you purchase it. But if you're a beginner or whoever's buying these snakes, it's a responsibility to make sure that you're buying a feeding one. But even as a feeding snake, these aren't going to be just like a bull-headed feeder like a lot of colubrids are, or like a boa constrictor. They're going to be more of a nuanced tease feed, especially when they're babies. And I actually made a separate video about feeding an entire litter that I just started, so you can kind of see what that nuance is. But it's just going to build some softer, nuancey type feeding skills that you won't have, that you won't see or learn with other species that you might get. Part and parcel to that is their tiny size. Cage security as babies, they're really easy to lose. So you need to keep them in something like a Tupperware container with tiny air holes in it, not a lidless rack system like most snakes can be kept in, and not most snake cages. They're just not secure enough for babies. So they are going to promote a lot of housing, security, discipline, and things like that for you, or you're going to lose your snake. So that's another thing where it's going to build skills for you. And the last thing is, as adults, their feeding responses can be a little bit spicy, quote unquote, and they need to be managed with hook training and tap training so you don't get bites. So that's another reason why they're a great species. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put away this female, and I'm going to show you a baby, and then I'm going to show you an adult and demonstrate what I mean by that feeding response. And so the thing I want you to see right now is this adult is totally handleable. It's tractable. It hasn't tried to bite me here because it's not in feed mode. And I just want you to put that in your head before I show you this last thing I'm going to show you in this video. So here, let me show you. I'm going to put this one back, and I'll show you its enclosure. I keep the adults in these standard rack system, like these are ball python rack systems. So if you have a ball python rack, you can keep adults in them too. You could keep babies in them too. Just they need to be in a lidded container, like a Tupperware container. But they're very simple: humid hide box, aspen and pine pellet, substrate, and a clean water bowl. That's all they need. But here I'm going to try to show you a baby. So this is how I keep babies in to-go containers with a rubber band for security. And again, very simple. I keep them on a little bit of orchid moss with a salad cup of water. And the only last thing I'd say is you need to be careful with humidity in these small containers. You don't want them to be dry, especially as babies. You want them to have enough humidity, but you also don't want this cage to be soggy. So if you see here on the cold side by the water, I got a little bit of fog, but everything else is relatively dry. But let me show you these babies, and they are defensive as babies. So these are fully started. These have had 8 to 10 meals on them. But if you can see, when they're born, they're like the size of an earthworm. So this is a tiny, fast, squirrely little snake that you can kind of learn how to handle. And it's just a really good thing. At this point, this would be great for any beginner that wanted to put in the time. Again, when they feed on pinkies if they're started properly when you get them. Either you can do that by using tweezers and tongue feeding them, or you can cup them in a little deli cup overnight. And I'm actually going to put a link to a video showing how I fed this entire litter, so you guys can see that. So I just wanted to show you how small a baby is, but here you can see it's a little bit defensive, but these bites are completely inconsequential. But what the art in a baby is not losing it. So keeping it in a secure container. And then also your presentation with feeding, which I made a separate video to demonstrate that. And that will just build a lot of skills for you as an avid beginner that will apply to other people. And now I'm going to show you a behavior. And what I mean by this is one artifact of this species, all the Antaresia species, is that they're very food motivated as adults. And I'm going to, a lot of these are in sheds, so they're not going to do it, but this one's not. If you can see this guy, he just cued in. He is ready to go, okay? And a lot of beginner species aren't going to give you this feedback. But see this guy, he is food avid. He is avid for food, so you better be an avid beginner if you want to deal with these snakes. And I'll tell you the way to manage these, and what I'm going to do, I don't want you to get alarmed by it, because the other snake that I was handling this whole time would do the exact same thing if I did not hook or tap train this snake. Hook or tap training a snake is when you touch them with something that's not your hand to turn off the food response before you pick them up. I'm not going a lot into hook or tap training or into the general care of these species because they're very well documented all over the internet. But I just wanted to say that, see this species, this will build a skill. You should be able to read this snake is excited about food. And if you don't hook or tap train it and you just reach in, this is what's going to happen. Every time. That's just a knotted up sock. It won't hurt him and it won't hurt me. But they have a food response, a pretty good one. They're committed. And if that was your hand that you reached in there, you would be attached to your snake until you ran it under a faucet to let it go. But that's just one of the reasons, if you're somebody as a beginner who's really looking into a species that is spicier or higher demanding, this is one of the reasons why they're a great species. So children's pythons, great beginner species for the avid beginner.